1893, at the age of 33, Catherine Lee Bates, an English professor at Wellesley College, had taken a trip to Colorado Springs, Colorado, to teach a short summer school session at Colorado College. Several of the sights on her trip inspired her, and they found their way into a poem she wrote. The sights included the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the White City with its promise of the future contained within its alabaster buildings, the wheat fields of America's heartland, Kansas, through which her train was riding on July 16th, and the majestic view of the Great Plains from high atop Pikes Peak. On the pinnacle of that mountain, the words of the poem started to come to her, and she wrote them down upon returning to her hotel room. The poem was initially published 2 years later in The Congregationalist to commemorate the 4th of July. It quickly caught the public's fancy. At the top of Pikes Peak is a large placard with the words of Bates' poem, "O beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea." God has shed his grace on our nation. Bates calls for God to continue to do that. God shed his grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood. God continues to show us grace, but grace must be accepted. It must be used. Our nation was founded on religious principles. The first pilgrims arrived in 1620. The boat they crossed the ocean in was only 26 feet by 113 feet. We have bigger sailboats out on lakes today. But they did, and when they got here, the first legal document they signed was called the Mayflower Compact. The second paragraph begins with these words, "For the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith." The Puritans made public record as to why they came to America. In the opening sequence of the New England Confederation, it says, "Whereas we all came into these parts of America with one and the same end and aim, to advance the kingdom of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to enjoy the liberties of the gospel in liberty and peace." Congress voted to put the words "In God We Trust" on our money. By the way, in 1776, 11 of the 13 colonies required that before you could run for political office, you had to be a professing Christian. The next year, Congress voted to spend $300,000 to purchase new Bibles for distribution to the nation, including giving them to schools to use as study books. Did you know that all 50 states have constitutions that refer to God? The famous Liberty Bell has part of Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10 inscribed on it. "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." Above the Los Angeles City Hall, part of Proverbs 14:34 is written, "Righteousness exalteth the nation, but sin is a reproach to any people." We read in Psalms 33, verse 12, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he chose for his inheritance." When a nation, when a large group of people as a nation give emphasis to God and to his word, it is a good thing. It is a positive thing for that nation. In the April 1994 edition of Reader's Digest, there was an article by former Secretary of Education William Bennett. The article was entitled, "What Really Ails America?" It had this to say: "Today, much of society ridicules and mocks those who are serious about their faith. America's only respectable form of bigotry is bigotry against religious people. And the only reason for the hatred of religion is that it forces us to confront matters many would prefer to ignore. To a great extent, our society has gotten what it wanted, a society without God. But what good has it done? Bennett goes on to say, last year I compiled the Index of Leading Cultural Indicators, a statistical portrait of American behavioral trends of the past 3 decades. Among the findings, since 1960, while the gross domestic product has nearly tripled, violent crime has increased at least 560%. Divorces have more than doubled. The percentage of children in single-parent homes has tripled. And by the end of the decade, 40% of all American births and 80% of minority births will occur out of wedlock. That was 1994. It has only gotten worse. Dr. James Dobson has said, we are involved in nothing less than a civil war of values, a collision between two ways of seeing life. This is not an issue of two alternatives from which to choose, but a life and death struggle. One value system is going to predominate. One is going to rule the country. Which way will America choose? Which way has America chosen? Someone has said, we keep asking God to bless America. He already has. Now it's our turn. As we look around at our nation, as we look at our nation from the Christian point of view, there are so many distressing factors. What can we do as Christians? One thing we must do is overcome apathy. A man by the name of Richard Hogue said something about our involvement that we need to heed. If our country survives, and I realize that's a big if, it will be because there is an awakening in the lives of committed Christians across our nation who finally began to realize that it is not only their opportunity, but also their absolute responsibility to be intricately involved in the political process of our country, and to use that involvement to turn this nation once again to the Lord. For too long, we have allowed our government to grow farther and farther away from the direction that God has always demanded our nation take. At the same time, we have yielded the control of our country to a godless, secular, humanistic philosophy that has absolutely sapped the strength and spiritual vitality America has always had. Never before in the history of Christendom have so many believers been willing to forfeit their liberty and freedom without even putting up a struggle. I believe his words really hit the mark. It is all too easy to look at the mess we're in and close our eyes. Edmund Burke said, all that's necessary for the forces of evil to win in the world is for enough good men to do nothing. We will help our nation if we will be good citizens, if we will be involved. A very important factor, I think one that we sometimes downplay, is the importance of prayer. Paul wrote in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, I urge then, first of all, that request, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for everyone, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. Keep in mind Paul's situation when he wrote those words to Timothy. Rome ruled the world. For a time, Rome just thought the Christians were a new sect of the Jewish religion, didn't have a lot of concern. But they began to realize, no, this is not just a different form of Judaism. This is a new religion. It's a new religion that only believes in one God. That was not the normal way of doing religion in the Roman Empire. There were many gods. You wanted all of them to be on your side. But Paul is writing not in a situation even like ours, but in a situation that is becoming more and more anti-Christian. By the time he writes his second letter, he will be in prison, anticipating his ultimate execution. But he calls upon Timothy to pray, to urge others to pray, and to pray for the kings. Samuel Chadwick said, "The one concern of the devil is to keep Christians from praying. He fears nothing from prayerless studies, prayerless work, and prayerless religion. He laughs at our toil, mocks at our wisdom, but he trembles when we pray." I've already touched on this, but we need to be good citizens. And I want to elaborate on that. We need to be good citizens of our country. Wherever we live, whatever our nationality, we are to be good citizens. We think of things from the American point of view because that's who we are. It was a great blessing to be born in this nation. We were ahead in the game simply by being born on American soil. But wherever one lives, he can be a Christian. Whatever form of government there is, he can be a Christian. And again, we remember that the Apostle Paul was a Christian under not ideal circumstances. And yet he wrote to Christians on what they were to do. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. "Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes. For the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor." We sometimes find those words hard to follow, even in our own situation. But think about Paul in his situation. He is telling Christians under the control of the Roman Empire to follow the government. Now, there is an exception, isn't there? And we see that in Peter, where he says we must obey God rather than men. I believe it was Jack Lewis who said, "A bad government is better than no government at all." If we really think about that, that's somewhat true, isn't it? Anarchy is not a good thing. Rome was an imperfect government. We have an imperfect government. There is not a perfect government in the world. Never has been. Why? Because those in it are imperfect. But God has instituted government. He has used government and uses government. There is order when there is government. And Paul says, okay, pray and follow the government unless it conflicts, we would say, with God's word. That's the overall message of Scripture. For the most part, government protects those who are doing good. Not always, but for the most part. And yes, Paul says, pay your taxes. Peter has something to say on the subject as well. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 through 17. Submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority or to governors, or sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God. Honor the king. There are places in our world today where there is a high cost of being a Christian. There is persecution of those who would be Christians. Remember reading that in a communist society, basically says, well, you can practice your religion. Basically, don't talk about it. Don't even talk to your children about it. In our own nation, we have seen some eroding of the freedom of religion. We have seen a growing hostility toward Christianity. The words of Paul and Peter are still timeless. Perhaps in some ways they seem more applicable than they did 2 or 3 decades ago in our own situation. Because we are called upon to be good citizens, no matter what. We do not disobey God. God comes first. But we are good citizens in the land where we live. We need to be good citizens, but I think we also need to realize that we're more than Americans. The person in Germany is more than a German. The person in Russia is more than a Russian. If we are Christians, we are citizens of God's kingdom. In fact, our citizenship in the kingdom of God must come first. Jesus must be our King. Our first loyalty must be to Him. We must follow His law no matter what the laws of the land say. Our morality must be guided by the Word of God. We have just finished something called Pride Month. It is a sad statement of what has become. The disintegration of the family, the lower moral values of individuals, is evidence of a rejection of God and His Word. What happens when the foundation of a building erodes? In Florida, a few days ago, a building collapsed. I believe someone observed that doesn't happen in America, but it did. And as the days have gone on, some things are coming to light. That building had a problem. And I think it will be found that a lot of those problems were down at the lower level in the foundations. And it collapsed. In our nation, we're being threatened by a crumbling moral foundation. The average person in America has their own set of standards. And it may, or very likely may not be, guided by the Word of God. For too many people, it's kind of this: God, I'll follow you if it suits me. But if I want to do something different, I'm going to do that. And we have seen, as a nation, people more and more choosing their own way rather than the way of God. Our nation has been weakened by the failures of its citizens. We can strengthen our nation by making better citizens. The proclamation of the Word of God will lead to citizens of the kingdom of God and better citizens of our nation. There needs to be a moral reawakening. Why is it that you shouldn't steal? Is it because the law says you shouldn't? The real reason is that God says don't steal. The same applies to so many other laws. If you're a Christian, you have a moral standard that will strengthen a nation. When people leave Christianity, when they leave the way of God, the foundations will crumble. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, now how's that for a name, made this good statement: freedom, a fine word when rightly understood. What freedom would you have? What is the freedom of the most free? To act rightly. Bennett concludes his article with these words: today we must carry on a new struggle for the country we love. We must push hard against an age that is pushing hard against us. If we have full employment and greater economic growth, if we have cities of gold and alabaster, but our children have not learned to walk in goodness, justice, and mercy, then the American experiment, no matter how gilded, will have failed.